Welcome to the Pharma Source podcast.
Today I'm joined by Leon Wyszkowski, President of the Analytical Services Division of Clinical Research at Thermo Fisher Scientific. With nearly 30 years in drug development and leadership roles spanning operations, clinical services and supply chain logistics, Leon brings a unique perspective on how large-scale analytical capabilities can accelerate drug development. So we'll be discussing Thermo Fisher's expansion in the Nordics, their recent partnership with AstraZeneca's BioVenture hub, and how integrated end-to-end solutions can serve both emerging biotechs and established pharma. So thank you for joining me today, Leon. So you've been in drug development your whole career, starting at Pfizer and then spending the last 20 odd years at Thermo Fisher across increasingly senior roles. So what's kept you in this space for so long then, and what drew you specifically to the analytical services side of it?
Yeah, Dora, let me just start by thanking you for the invitation to be part of your podcast. Great to be here. Look, to me, I want to start first with the mission that we have at Thermo Fisher Scientific. And that mission is a very clear one, right? We enable our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer, right? With that mission, you start first, central on the customer. So we're a service provider, hence enabling our customer success. And the part of the organization that I represent is really on that healthier part. And that's what's kept me in the industry for so long, is being able to be part of an industry that really is able to deliver these therapies to patients to really create a healthier world, really combating some of the most challenging diseases in the most impactful therapeutic areas.
Great. And so you transitioned from internal pharma operations at Pfizer to the service provider side at Thermo Fisher. So what was the biggest surprise or adjustment in that transition? What did you learn about drug development that you kind of hadn't appreciated from the other side?
Yeah, I enjoyed, it's a great question in the sense I really have enjoyed the ability to be on both sides of the fence because I think both are critical in our industry today. When I think about being part of Pfizer and any kind of innovator, we think about organizations like Pfizer, many years of great success, and that success really comes, at least with the time that I was there, it comes from a process discipline, right? Platforms, that really have driven incredible therapies into market. When you go externally, you do need to have the agility and the flexibility to support many different customers with many different approaches, many different processes. And that's been quite interesting, to being on the supplier side. I also think the ability to truly meet the customer where they're at, right? Listen to the customer. What are the challenges that they're trying to solve for, and then be able to create the right solutions has also been an interesting learning, being on the kind of supplier side. I would say the final point is the evolution that I've seen in my career, where I think at the beginning, when you outsourced, I think in terms because you either had to, right? You had a volume issue, a capacity issue. Nowadays, there is so much capability, know-how, expertise that exists on both sides of the kind of supplier-innovator equation, where you're now starting to become truly a more trusted partner in these outsourcing relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you say that. That's what I hear over and over again in these kinds of conversations, that more and more CDMOs and service providers are just becoming more strategic partners, and with increasingly complex modalities, that real expertise of doing it every day over and over again, they really have that expertise that you might not have kind of in-house. So I know that Thermo Fisher is opening a major bioanalytical facility in Gothenburg, where we are recording it here at Nordic Life Science Days, next March, with about 140 new scientists. That's a big investment. So what is driving that expansion in Sweden specifically?
Yeah, I want to also go back to one point that you have made, that when you tend to be an innovator, you tend to specialize in certain platforms. When you're a supplier, because you mentioned about the expertise, because you have to be a supplier for the industry, you do have to build expertise in multiple modalities, multiple platforms, which then make you that much more of a not just trusted, but wanted partner, because partners are looking for or to leverage the expertise you're building in collaborating with other innovators to support as they expand into new platforms and new modalities themselves. Which leads to the question that you asked me about why the Nordics and why the expansion. I'll start first with the fact that when you are looking to be a partner to the industry, one of the things that the customers are looking for is they're looking for a supplier that has scale. Part of that scale is also geographic footprints. One of the areas that we saw that we needed to shore up was our global footprint for our bioanalytics business. We have a very significant capability in the U.S. We expanded about 5 years ago and created a capability in China, but there was a gap in our footprint, specifically in Europe. That's what drove us to look at being able to expand within the European geography. And then there's a couple of different things I'm sure we'll get into as to why is it that we picked Sweden.
Yeah, because I know you recently announced an R&D partnership with AstraZeneca's BioVenture hub here in Gothenburg. Is that partnership another reason that you expanded your analytical facilities here, or are those two kind of things separate?
Yeah, they are separate. So I'll give you the first investment, which is within the GoCo campus, the biotech hub that was created here in Gothenburg. That's really a true contract laboratory expansion.
Yeah.
One of the things that drew us, there was a few things that drew us to Sweden. When you look to expand in this space, we're really looking for three things specifically. One is we're looking for the ability to have a very stable, transparent regulatory environment, especially when it comes to transportation, because one of the things that we have to do is all of the clinical samples within Europe and sometimes globally have to be able to come in smoothly into our laboratories for testing. So that's one area. Second area is talent. Talent is incredibly important. If I think about the differentiator in our business, isn't the equipment itself or the facility, it really is the scientists that are working with customers to really create assays to solve some very complex scientific challenges. So we need talent. And then we need the ability to create that investment, right, and be able to expand from there. We don't just want this is an initial investment. We want to be able to have the ability in the space to grow. And Sweden, and specifically Gothenburg, ticked all the boxes. Now, why that investment in GoCo is different than the BioVenture hub that we had announced a few weeks back? BioVenture is an evolution of the strategic outsourcing that we talked about earlier, where now we have engaged with AstraZeneca inside their campus. There's about 7 scientists inside their organization where we are going to, in a sense, co-create and develop assays that are focused on solving some of the biggest challenges that we have in areas of proteomics, especially around sensitivity and microdosing.
Interesting. So the GoCo hub is basically for logistics, talent, and scalability. That was kind of attractions. And then with this AstraZeneca partnership, tell me more about what that partnership looks like. You have employees at the AstraZeneca hub. Where is the line between kind of your internal employees and AstraZeneca's employees? How does that work?
And it's a great question. We're used to having that kind of model that we work within. Some of our employees are working hand in hand within our customers' facilities. I think this one is unique in that what we are now, in a sense, creating, if you think about the way that we outsource standard, we tend to outsource a project. There's a project, there's a set of deliverables, there's a timeline, and we're all working together to deliver both the outcome at the right time with the right level of quality to our customer. What we're trying to deliver, in a sense, and I mentioned the word co-creation, what this is all about is about innovation. And in order to foster that free exchange of ideas, we want it to be co-located within the AstraZeneca campus, within this BioVenture hub that already has that culture of innovation, of collaboration. But we wanted to do it in a way that you had that proximity. so that both their scientists, our scientists, wouldn't necessarily be able to tell who's the AstraZeneca employee, who's the Thermo Fisher employee, because we want them to worry about and focus on is what challenges are we trying to solve for, what platforms do we then leverage to solve those challenges, and then how together do we actually go about creating these new assays to help us continue the journey on medical research as these biomarkers, as these modalities become much more complex in our space.
And yeah, interesting. So obviously that really focuses on innovation. Is that something you think this partnership model enables that's not quite possible through traditional client-vendor relationships? The coffee break kind of conversations that you have that you might not if you're more separate.
You mentioned the coffee break, and that's very interesting because when we were first having the discussion with AstraZeneca and some of their key leaders, one of the areas that we were talking about in our tour guided us to was the coffee room, the coffee, kind of stand, and because that's some of that, kind of in terms of being able to take a break, have a conversation, because you're not really necessarily taking a break from the thinking and the partnership, but you're taking a break from the lab work, but you're doing it together, right? So it's the ability to almost maximize, right, the connection points to be able to continue to drive the innovation that our business requires to continue to advance these therapies.
Yeah. Okay. And so back to your GoCo expansion, building a new team of so many highly experienced employees is a big undertaking. So where are you finding that talent? Are you recruiting locally in Sweden, bringing people already from Thermo Fisher, or a bit of both?
Yeah. It's a little bit of all of the above, right? Thermo Fisher is not new to Sweden. We have 1,500 employees already in Sweden, mostly in Uppsala, and also employees here in Gothenburg. We go across multiple businesses in Sweden, from our consumables distribution, Fisher Scientific business, to some of our diagnostics are already here. So we're going to leverage the fact that we have a significant footprint in Sweden with HR resources, human resources, to allow us to drive recruitment within the country. It helps also that you're part of this ecosystem, not just the proximity to AstraZeneca, but being within a biotech hub that we can draw the talent from across multiple areas within Sweden. But we also want to be able to recruit talent from outside of the country and cross-pollinate. Be able to bring some of the expertise that we have built in other parts of our organization. As I mentioned, we have a pretty significant capability in the U.S., for example. Be able to bring some of our colleagues into our operation here to be able to start sharing best practices, deploy our operational systems, and do that in a much more seamless way to be ready faster to support our customers.
Yeah, interesting. I guess that's one benefit of kind of being such a huge company. You already have an enormous talent pool to play around with. So kind of on that point, you benefit from being a very large organization. How does that translate into practical benefits for your customers? What can you kind of do that smaller, maybe specialized players can't do?
I'll put it in I think in three buckets, right? I think one is the talent bucket, and you had mentioned that already. I think part of what we benefit from being a part of Thermo Fisher Scientific is Thermo Fisher has such a great reputation, especially in the laboratory space. I mean, what a great combination. I'm part of a laboratory company, and I run the laboratory services organization within the laboratory company. Now, why I say that's important is because that reputation attracts talent. The scale that we have, why that also attracts talent, is because those individuals feel like they can have a career, a very beneficial career, within Thermo Fisher. Our customers benefit from that talent because we have talked a lot about, during our conversation, about the expertise and how it really is a differentiation. We want to be able to recruit the best in the industry. So being part of a global organization like Thermo Fisher helps us do that. I think the second part of it is the ability to drive investments. Our customers really look for scale. We have to be able, if we're going to be a provider for the industry, we need to be able to drive and have the scale, the capabilities that our customers are looking for. And finally, we have to be able to be a supplier and a partner to the entire industry. Whether you are 5 individuals with a molecule, or you are a large, global pharma with tens of thousands of employees. And in order to do that, and why we that's important to us, and why scale is important to us, is look, no matter what customer, whether you're a small customer, whether you're a large global pharma, there's no customer that ever says, I just want my therapy to be deployed in one country. Right? Our aspirations of being part of this industry, I talked about the mission earlier, is to be able to have the greatest impact, that our innovation have the greatest impact as possible to human health. You need partners like ours to be able to truly maximize that impact.
I see. So on the flip side then, big organizations can be seen as harder to work with, more bureaucracy, long decision chains, less flexibility. How do you maintain responsiveness and adaptability in such a large company?
I think part of it is how we are set up within Thermo Fisher. It is a large company, but there are about 25 different divisions in the company. I run one of them, but the company has always been very focused on also ensuring that there is a spirit of entrepreneurialism in the organization. So I feel like I'm empowered to be able to run this business as if it were my own business. So, there are guardrails, of course, but when it comes to the specific area of analytical services, the kind of investments we need to make, the organizational structure we need to have, the operational execution, accountability, that all resides with me and my leadership team. Now, why I bring that up is because you are now bringing the impact, the accountability, the responsibility of delivering for our customers directly to the business that delivers that to the customer. So it's not yes, the company expects that, but the accountable point is the business that is responsible for those services. So that's one area. That's more of a cultural aspect of it. But the second is really the way we make it so that the engagement points with our customer feel small. The complexity of you running a global business, the complexity of the large scale that we talked about, we don't want our customers to worry about that. We want our customers to focus on engaging with our project management teams. Those project management teams are small. They focus on our customers. They drive a project plan. And those project managers worry about ensuring that all those capabilities that exist across this organization are brought to bear to deliver the project for our customers.
I see. So that kind of that culture and also organization structure kind of allow you to operate flexibly like maybe a smaller business, but still having that kind of infrastructure of that big company. Interesting. So let's move on to talk about digitization and AI. Those words are thrown around a lot in the last couple of years in this industry. Where are you seeing those technologies actually making a real impact in analytical services?
And I want to split that out into, because you mentioned automation and AI.
Yeah.
I think I'll go automation. I think for many years now we have been focusing on automation, both at a company level. So Thermo Fisher provides those services in terms of integrating analytical lines. We've been leveraging that in terms of the services that we provide. I think a lot of that has been deployed to what I would call high throughput, low changeover assays. So these are vaccine programs as an example, where you get large set of samples that you can just run through an automated line. I think the evolution that we're starting to go through is how to deploy that technology to now low throughput, so smaller sample volumes, but higher changeover, which means different assays that are run multiple times throughout the day. Yeah. I think that's going to be one of the big impacts, because now you start to really automate the entire laboratory, not just certain assays within the laboratory. I think AI has been quite impactful. We're starting to deploy that, and I would say that that's deployed on the bookends of the assay itself. And what's the bookend? So the bookend is, how do you set up your electronic notebook? How do you set up the assay from a protocol breakdown, for example? How can we leverage AI to do that faster? But then the other piece is at the end, once the assay is run and you have the data, how do you then use AI and digitization to not just compile the data, but then are able to then actually exchange the data with your customer so that that's done in a more seamless way. Now, there's only so much you're going to be able to do on the assay front, right, in terms of reducing cycle time. But if we focus on getting the assay started faster and getting the data to our customers faster, I think that's going to reduce the overall cycle time. And it's not just about cycle time. So I'll end with this point. Part of how we focus at both the automation and the AI deployment is on quality. And one of the areas that we want to really be truly focused in is how do we then create an assay that is more reliable and that it creates less repeat rates. And that is how we not only, yes, the process itself takes less time, but the fact that you're doing it with a lot better quality and that those assays have to be repeated at less pace or lesser rate really overall is able to deliver the data to our customers at a much faster pace.
Interesting. So when implementing new solutions, whether it's automated solutions or AI solutions, how do you sort of evaluate the new capabilities? How do you pick the low-hanging fruit from something that actually might be very difficult and expensive to implement and then actually have a lower impact? What metrics do you use?
So the metrics are like the low-hanging fruits, right? In terms of how do we assess the automation that we want to go after and invest in. I think one, the lower-hanging fruit are the ones that I mentioned earlier, right? The large volume sets of samples, standard assays that you can automate. That allows us to really deliver data to customers at a much faster pace than if you tried to do that manually. So the first priority is always around cycle time. Okay. The second one, we start to look at what are the processes within a workflow that really create issues with repeatability. So if you think about a laboratory, for example, the amount of the sample prep and the amount of manual pipetting that it requires, that does drive issues with the ability to actually repeat that assay accurately, consistently. So then being able to automate that part of the assay makes a ton of sense because then you're driving quality up. The next step is going to be for us, how do you tie all that together? How do you go from sample receipt to data distribution to a customer and truly automate the entire workflow?
Interesting. Let's move on to talk about general kind of analytical strategy. What are the most common mistakes you see sponsors you work with make? What should they be thinking about earlier in development that kind of gets left too late?
Because the laboratory business that I represent, really we have three separate laboratories, right? We have a laboratory that really focuses on product testing. We have another laboratory that focuses on patient testing. It's our central laboratory. Then we have a laboratory that focuses on drug product interaction with the patient. That's bioanalytics, right? So I'll try to make it so it's more general in terms of answering that question. I think for me, it's about right at the beginning when you're designing the assays that we're going to run, and you tech transferring those assays from a customer, always keeping in mind that the goal of the data that we're generating is to be able to submit it in a packet for a regulator to approve that product. And that to understand, because of all the years that we've been in business, to understand the scrutiny that a regulator will have on the data that we have created and how robust those assets have to have that mindset at the beginning, be able to evolve, because I think at the early stages, you don't need all of those controls. You want to go fast, but you also want to make sure that as you're going fast, you don't forget that in the end, what we're all striving for is to have an assay that can sustain a regulatory audit, and the data is able to be submitted without an issue to be able to have the product be approved. So it's the ability to really think through the different stages of development and how robust that assay have to be in the journey that you have to go through, always keeping the end goal in mind.
Interesting. So from your experience then, where do analytical bottlenecks typically create the biggest delays in drug development, and what can companies do to avoid these issues?
It honestly is not necessarily just in the assay itself, right? I think once we have the samples in our operations, whether it's in our GMP testing for a pharmaceutical product, or whether it's in our clinical delivery businesses, it's really about the logistics of getting the samples to the laboratories, right? A large part of our business is all of the activities that occur to get kits to a clinical site, to get samples pulled in and samples sent back to a laboratory. So that's one of the bottlenecks, is moving all of these samples around the world, and hence the regional expansion. How do we can make these supply chains shorter and less complex to create less bottlenecks in getting the samples to the testing laboratories? I think the other bottleneck is always the data transmission. As we talked about, that's an area that we're focusing on, digital. Because if you think about it, it's one interesting point about how the laboratory data that we're generating, how important it's become and how complex it's become. 70% of the data that gets filed to get a product approved is laboratory data. In a clinical trial, as an example, 10 years ago, total clinical trial, had 900,000 data points that were created for submission. That's one trial. Today is 3.2 million.
Wow.
So it gives you a little bit of a sense of the complexity that we're dealing with, but the large amount of data that we then have to transfer that then starts to create that second bottleneck to a customer, and that the ways that we're doing that data transfer today have not changed over the last 10 years. So hence why that is so critical for us to then have that digital focus on now the data exchanges with our customers.
Interesting. So do you think tech transfer is one of those low-hanging fruits that's obvious to digitize, and why haven't we done that yet?
I use the word data transfer because tech transfer is usually the assays that are getting transferred to our laboratories.
Okay. Yeah.
And then the data transfers. I think the hesitation on focusing the digital investments. One, technology has to catch up. Okay, that's super important. Okay, but number two, we tend to be in a very conservative industry. So those changes, in terms of deploying AI, in terms of deploying digital, take some time. Not just for ourselves, for our customers to embrace, but for the regulators to embrace. And that's really the most important. We have assays that have run the same way for 30 years that we have not changed, even though there's better technology out there, because those are the assays that are the gold standard for that particular therapeutic area, and nobody wants to take the risk of not having the data be accepted by a regulator. So it's the ability to collaborate as an industry. You know, a lot of things that we're doing here in like Nordic days, right, is the ability to connect biotech with biopharma, with the regulators, with partners like us. How do we together continue to, on this journey, continue to educate the regulators to accept and continue to embrace as those technology shifts happen, right? When we start to use that technology, and we're starting to do that, so that is happening. But you'd ask why now and not earlier. I think there's a lot of different things that have to happen. The technology has to be ready, and we have to be ready to accept the use of that technology to help us do our job more effectively.
It is interesting, this industry being so kind of the forefront of innovation, constantly advancing patient care, but then still kind of having that juxtaposition of then actually being behind in a lot of those areas. It'll be interesting to see kind of how we develop. So looking ahead then, sort of in the next 5 years or so, how do you see the role of analytical services evolving in drug development? What's going to change?
I think it's going to continue to have a position of being incredibly important. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of the facts about like how much lab data is used for submissions, over the course of the last, in the time that I've been in the industry, as you mentioned, 30 years, the evolution of the modalities. We've gone small molecules, tablets and capsules, to biologics, and now we're, doing viral vectors, and we're doing mRNA, and and ADCs, and now we're starting to see radioligands coming in. I mean, you mentioned the innovation that we have as an industry in terms of what modalities have therapeutic impact. The more complex those become, the more impactful laboratories are going to be. I had a conversation with a partner of ours, a big biopharma organization, when I first took over this business, because before then I was in our CDMO business. And she said to me, and she was responsible for both CDMO and analytics. And she goes, nowadays, they understand how to manufacture these new products. The analytics is what's giving them the biggest challenges. And I think this is why you have the partnership that we talked about earlier with AstraZeneca and their BioVenture hub, and why that partnership is a partnership that is around analytics in clinical space, is because the regulators still require that data, that there's much more data that the clinical trial requires in order to submit it, but to get to that data, it's becoming much more complex. So I do believe that the laboratory space, whether it's testing the product or whether it's being able to create the clinical data that's required to file a submission to get approval, the laboratory will continue to be a very important part of the evolution of our industry. As modalities become more complex, the trials become more complex, the laboratories will become that much more important.
Yeah, interesting. So do you have any advice then, as a final point, for biotechs and external manufacturing leaders when they're evaluating analytical service partners? What matters the most?
Over the years, and being able to have been both on the innovator front, when I was at Pfizer, one of my roles was being somebody who was responsible for outsource coordination. And then 20 years being spent now being a supplier for the industry, whether it's CDMO or whether analytical services or even packaging logistics. I think the one thing that we always have in common, that I find that in common with what customers truly are looking for, is trust. Those capabilities, platforms, laboratories, scale, geography, expertise, we do differentiate, and we try to differentiate in those spaces, but in the end, what the customers, I think, are looking for, when they test us out, right? When they come to our sites and visit us and talk to our scientists, they're looking to understand if they can trust us. They're about to give us, whether you're a one molecule company or whether you are a company that has multiple modalities and a huge portfolio and you're running 500 or 600 different clinical trials in a year, those molecules are the future of the company, and you're entrusting your future with a partner. And I think in the end, the real question is, can I trust you with the future of my organization? And that's the most important thing that we could do as a partner, is make sure we're earning that trust every single day.
How do you know that you can be trusted? Is it a gut instinct, or are there metrics?
Yeah, I think there's a combination, right? There's a combination of course, customers will come in, they're going to test either your scientific expertise, they're going to look at your metrics, quality, on-time delivery, they're going to look at your capabilities, you walk around, and so there's things that are truly objective, right? But in the end, it's going to be subjective. The conversations with leadership, how you show up to a bid defense, how credible are you recommending the solutions that you're recommending to a customer. I think we talked earlier about the evolution, right, of our space. If I were to think about when I became a supplier 20 years ago, our definition of being a trusted partner was basically create a solution for whatever the customer needed you to do. Today, the definition of a trusted partner is really understanding the challenges that a customer is trying to solve and create the best solution. So customers are rating you, not just on what you've done before, but what can you do for me for these challenges and the creative solutions you can bring to bear to be able to assure us that you can deliver on the commitments that you're making.
Interesting. Well, great. Thanks a lot for giving me your insights today. I appreciate your time.
Dora, thank you very much for having me again. My pleasure.